transmigrated as a disabled protagonist. How should I continue the script? Chapter 6, In Search of the Left Leg. Dazai, poor little miserable, Osamu successfully infiltrated the sheep. Moreover, his sweet-talking, coupled with his bandages that couldn't hide his handsome face, quickly made him accepted by the organization's female comrades, who could hardly bear the other male members' overly masculine personalities. Except for Yuan, who preferred Nakahara Chuya. Seeing Nakahara Chuya sitting beside her with a gloomy face, troubled by port mafia matters, she had no fondness for the refugee Dazai Osamu, silently cursing, "A weakling, isn't Chuya much cooler?" She didn't join the crowd showing concern for Dazai Osamu and instead went to Nakahara Chuya, whispering, "Chuya, this guy's background is unclear." Nakahara Chuya, of course, knew that Dazai Osamu was a ticking time bomb. However, the resilience within his bones and his protective instinct made it impossible for him to drive this person away. Yet, hearing the words, "background is unclear," from his comrade struck a nerve in his spine. Because he, too, was a person with an unclear background. The sheep could accept him, so why couldn't he accept someone else after becoming a leader? Taking a sip and a bite, Nakahara Chuya grumbled, "I will investigate a bit during the day. If he really is being hunted down by Port Mafia and joined us as a last resort, I don't plan on refusing him. Let's observe him for a while longer." Yuan, somewhat afraid of Port Mafia, asked, "Could he drag us into trouble?" Nakahara Chuya replied sternly, "As long as I'm here, I'll protect everyone." The sheep was established as a self-defense group for the youth to protect ourselves. I can't just sit by and ignore any miner asking us for help. A firm and resolute attitude. Normally, Nakahara Chuya could bring his comrades a sense of reassurance, but this time, Yuan was still conflicted inside. She secretly glanced at Dazai Osamu, who was sitting among a few girls. The frail boy gave her a pleading, helpless expression. Yuan blushed and turned her head away, twisting a strand of her pink hair in her fingers, thinking to herself, "He really is very good-looking." Her unusual reaction did not escape Nakahara Chuya's attention, and the red-haired boy immediately felt a pang of frustration. Find him a place to rest. As the leader, Nakahara Chuya couldn't let things drag on any longer. It was late, and everyone should be going to sleep, not surrounding a prospective new member of the sheep with endless questions. When Shirase stayed silent, Yuan, in charge of logistics, said, "But we don't have any empty rooms." Nakahara Chuya hesitated, thinking about the frightening things in his own room. Embarrassed, he decided not to send Dazai Osamu there. For safety's sake, he can't stay with anyone else. My place isn't suitable either. Here's the plan, I'll go clean out the small room where I usually store junk, set up a bed, and let him stay there for the night. Everything else could wait until morning. Under the help of the Sheep King's gravity manipulation, the small room was cleaned up. Dazai Osamu pushed through the dust in the air, peeking inside to check out the dim surroundings and the wooden boards arranged as a bed. Seeing that he had no objections, Nakahara Chuya said to him, "There's a blanket and a pillow. Go on in." Dazai Osamu smiled and replied, "This is much better than where I've been staying." He wasn't lying. Recently, in the warehouse, he had been sleeping on the floor, using a few crates as a makeshift bed. Nearby was an imperfect, heat-emitting puppet, but he had lived through it with a certain flair, not feeling bored at all. First, there was the Port Mafia chasing him, and now there was the mysterious Yakimaru. Dazai Osamu felt like it was great. The condition being, Yakimaru hadn't lost a leg. Hey! Nakahara Chuya, considering that he had already helped Dazai Osamu settle in, was just about to leave when he stopped in his tracks. Outside, the fierce Sheep King questioned the prospective member, "How did you know about the sheep?" Dazai Osamu sat down in the dim, cramped room and obediently replied, "I heard about it." That strange feeling again. Nakahara Chuya felt uneasy, awkwardly reaching into his pocket for some chocolate and choosing to toss it onto Dazai Osamu's bed. "If you're hungry, eat a bit. There's no time to prepare food for you tonight." Thanks." Watching the other person leave, Dazai-osamu picked up the chocolate after the door closed. In the darkness, he coolly said, "To be so blatantly suspicious of my intentions, is that some kind of instinctual dog trait? What a pity, his level of vigilance was only at this degree. Too naive. There are not only pitiable little kids your age, there are also kids waiting to settle the score with you." After lying on the bed for a while and confirming that no one was passing by outside the door, Dazai-osamu quietly rolled over, pushed open the unlocked door, and stealthily tiptoed past several rooms of the sheep members. He stopped when he overheard Shirase's voice complaining to a comrade, "I only killed one person, but he still wants to dig deeper. Hasn't he killed his share of people? I did it for survival. Without money, who's going to support the sheep's expenses?" Bang! Damn Chiya. Back then, it was me and the others who brought him back. Without us, who would have taken him in? And now, during Yokohama's most chaotic time, he wants to kick me out of the sheep. The insults from the room continued, along with the sound of bottles and cups being slammed onto the floor. Outside the door, Dazai-osamu smiled as he listened, his eyes filled with the cold, predatory air of someone watching prey. Of course, someone of Shirase's level wasn't worthy of being his prey. But using Shirase as bait was enough to poison that so-called comrade, the Sheep King. Yakimaru. You see, this world's villains don't change just because you hit them a few times. And by the way, make sure you remember to eat something for me. 3 days later, Yakimaru had untied the ropes and was sitting on a soft fur rug and cushion, expressionless as he ate bread. However, he still couldn't leave the safe zone because his other legs had been hidden by Dororo. The other person seemed extremely concerned about his safety, not planning to let him walk freely anytime soon. Yakimaru, with his crippled legs and loss of mobility, didn't really mind. He had once been swaddled in despair, clinging to life, and during times of crisis, he had already made a decision. I must survive. To survive, temporarily losing everything was something he could endure. Luckily, he had found the foster father who saved him from his fate, Jukai, and encountered someone willing to stay by his side and help, someone who, upon seeing that he had lost his right leg, went out to figure out a way, Dororo. Yakimaru finished eating the bread he had managed to find, still not giving up on searching the warehouse for his left leg. Where's my leg? Dororo, going out alone will put you in danger. The demon god isn't something you can defeat. Where did you hide it? There's no way you hid it far away. Once again, he realized that Dororo wasn't just childish, but also had an impressive talent for hiding things. The calico cat sat just outside the warehouse, staring blankly inside, almost tugging at its own whiskers. What on earth was going on here? How is this any different from torturing Yakimaru? However, the calico cat didn't disturb Yakimaru. More than anyone else, it understood that this was his life. The meeting between this boy with so many missing body parts and another boy was fate, but also an unsteady bond. Any small disturbance from the outside world could easily destroy the fragile trust and feelings that had been so hard to build between them. It could find someone to help. It could observe from the shadows. But the one thing it couldn't do was help Yakimaru overcome the obstacles in his life or act as his arms and legs. When Yakimaru, in this determined state, tried to walk out of the warehouse in search of his left leg, the calico cat, filled with deep philosophical thoughts about life, immediately changed its mind. It pounced over and quickly bit onto Yakimaru's clothes. Meow. Going out like this would scare the passers-by. Yakimaru sensed the calico cat blocking him, and after a slight delay, he remembered his own terrifying, crippled appearance. His legs were important, but Dororo would worry. His mental encyclopedia clearly stated that Dororo admired Yakimaru. This made Yakimaru feel a bit troubled. If he left on his own, while Dororo was trying to find him a safe place, would Dororo get upset? From his past life, he had already come to understand a certain truth from the news. Many people's admiration for those with disabilities often stemmed from pity. Yakamaru possessed a delicate face, and his crippled limbs only seemed to enhance his extraordinary presence. However, this didn't extend to his awkward movements, and the faint impression of his character's image made him hesitate. He didn't want to be pitied, or to be looked upon with sympathy. How could things ever change if he continued like this? After a moment of silence, the calico cat noticed that Yakamaru no longer had any intention of leaving. Its eyes shifted, and it quietly loosened its bite, pretending to nonchalantly scratch its own fur. The brown-eyed cat kept a close watch on Yakamaru's every move. This child was too worrisome. Yakamaru no longer used his arms to support his body. Under the thin, warm sunlight filtering from the outside, he simply sat on the ground, without his legs, clumsily using his prosthetic arms to stroke the cat. The calico cat didn't shy away, allowing his cold, stiff hands to awkwardly touch its fur, though he couldn't really feel it. The cat came to a realization: he was expressing his gratitude. Yakamaru was thanking this small life for keeping him from pushing himself too far and ensuring that Dororo's efforts weren't in vain. He was trying to learn how to place greater trust in another person, believing that under the influence of fate, as the heroine of Dororo, Dororo wouldn't face any life-threatening danger. Although I'm a bit unwilling, the truth is, I can only wait for her to return. The black-haired boy lifted the calico cat and brought it in front of his face. One boy, one cat, staring at each other. Immediately after, the black-haired boy gazed intently at this small life flame, feeling that the other being also had a remarkable existence. How wonderful, not every part of this world is a disaster. Meanwhile, what the calico cat was thinking was, can he see this old man? For a brief moment, Natsume Soseki, who was usually busy acting cute and eating little dried fish, froze slightly. His guilty heart quickened, and the now heavier-than-ever calico cat trembled in mid-air, its chubby body shaking. Fortunately, Yakamaru only looked at it for a moment before setting it down. He even pulled out some food from his sleeve to feed it. The calico cat graciously took a bite. Soon after, it struggled to swallow. Meow, that little brat bought the worst and strangest flavored food for Yakamaru. How ridiculous, always teasing someone who can't even taste anything. Yakamaru couldn't tell what kind of little animal it was, so he just treated it like any other pet for now. Afterwards, he returned to the warehouse, closed the door, and acted in a way that the calico cat found satisfactory. The cat didn't follow him in. Instead, it jumped onto the top of the warehouse to sunbathe, afraid of being discovered again by Dazai-Osamu. Thanks to the silent efforts of the calico cat, Dazai-Osamu was able to see Yakamaru upon his return. Waiting quietly, Yakamaru seemed like the best gift for Dazai-Osamu. If you leave again, I won't come looking for you a second time, Dazai-Osamu said coldly, dropping the bundle in his hand and removing the covering. Inside was Yakamaru's right leg, which had been left behind in the Suribachi district. The leg had no wounds on it, completely restored to how it had been when he had just lost it. Discarding his earlier cold demeanor, Dazai-Osamu retrieved the left leg he had hidden, speaking with a mischievous tone. Let me help you put it on. He moved to support Yakamaru, lifting him up. As Dazai-Osamu touched the parts of Yakamaru's body where limbs were missing, an inexplicable feeling arose, a sense that both he and Yakamaru had been abandoned by the world. Could his current actions be what people called huddling together for warmth? Ridiculous. Between him and Yakamaru, who could bring warmth to the other? Dazai-Osamu effortlessly left the sheep without shedding any blood, then flashed a bright smile at Yakamaru. I struggled for 3 days, almost getting hunted down by that tiny dwarf. You owe me a reward. He pointed at the tip of Yakamaru's nose, firm and towering like a small mountain. Just don't lose that face. If you throw it away, I'll act like I never knew you. You won't ever see me again, and I won't go picking up someone with a ruined face. Don't torture my perfectly good eyesight. He can see through every small detail clearly. When analyzing human nature, Dazai-Osamu had to admit that his initial reason for staying by Yakamaru's side was due to a sense of novelty. Later on, it became about observing how Yakamaru survived. He didn't want to become the person facing that directly, he preferred to remain in the role of a bystander, appreciating the other's false facade. A puppet, as long as it looks beautiful, will always find admirers. Dazai Osamu adjusted his boots, resting his hand on the pale leather, but couldn't muster even a trace of nostalgia. Instead, he became intrigued and poked at Yakimaru's belt on his side, asking, "Yakimaru, do you feel ticklish?" Yakimaru sensed the situation at his waist and thought, "I don't feel ticklish, the demon god devoured my sense of touch." The two shared a strange telepathic connection. Dazai Osamu, in an oddly thoughtful tone, said, "Finding someone with psychic abilities, I wonder if they'd have any effect on you. The urgent matter now is still finding a doctor that's a bit more useful. Let's go." Dazai Osamu didn't know how many variations of these words he had said after meeting Yakimaru, but they became more and more casual over time. There was a glint in his eyes. These past days had truly been fun. "I'll take you to find a doctor." If he could pull someone living in the shadows out into the light, would he be able to witness a transformation unlike any other? Or perhaps he would gain someone who wholeheartedly trusted him. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7, The Black Clinic. Tonight, Mori Ogai's clinic has ceased operations. Dazai Osamu, during those 3 days, didn't just stay with the sheep. He also took time to meet with Dr. Mori, establishing an initial cooperation. The premise of this cooperation was that Mori Ogai would provide protection for both of them and offer underground medical services for Yakimaru. In comparison to what Dazai Osamu had agreed to do for Mori Ogai, these conditions were just an introduction to its master. The clinic's lights were fully on, windows tightly shut, and specialized ventilation systems were activated. The various medical supplies were cleared out to make space for a designated area for physical examinations, with the scent of disinfectant lingering all around. However, things didn't go as smoothly as Dazai Osamu had hoped. Yakimaru was fiercely resistant. As Dazai Osamu dragged him closer to this underground clinic, Yakimaru's senses immediately flashed a red warning. Within the range of his vision, a human life flame flickered about 10 meters ahead of them, blood red in hue. The bright crimson aura covered the life flame, so thick it seemed fueled by sins, proclaiming how many people it had killed. The worst of the worst, a murderer among murderers. This kind of human might have taken more lives than even demonic creatures, with a soul so tainted it ranked just below that of the demon god and the demons. Yakimaru couldn't endure it any longer. He immediately pushed Dazai Osamu aside and launched an attack toward the door where Mori Ogai stood. He leaped forward with the speed of an arrow, breaking free from Dazai Osamu's restraint with sheer force. Mori Ogai, as if having anticipated this, carefully retreated behind the door. Just as the ancient warrior-like blade came crashing down and the door was about to shatter, a young blonde girl in a white nurse's uniform rushed out, raising a large syringe in her hand to block the attack. A fierce clash instantly erupted between the two combatants with extraordinary abilities. Blades flashed and cut through the air, forcing Elise to try and shift the battlefield's location, but failed. Yakimaru's target was Mori Ogai, not the strange ability-made figure blocking his path. The instigator of this conflict, Mori Ogai, sighed helplessly and said to Dazai Osamu, "You didn't tell me he was this dangerous." Dazai Osamu chuckled, "You also didn't mention you're this evil." As Dazai Osamu observed alongside the port mafia members in the Suribachi district, even some of the hardened criminals with dozens of lives on their hands hadn't triggered in Yakimaru the kind of relentless determination to kill like this. This indicated one thing: the partner he had chosen was indeed a black killer who wouldn't hesitate to take lives. He was far more than just a simple doctor. Dozens of lives? No, at least hundreds, and if one dared to guess, it might even exceed 1,000. Seeing that Elise was about to be torn apart, Dazai Osamu began to suspect deep down that Mori Ogai had once been involved in war, either as a battlefield medic or perhaps a military officer. He exchanged a glance with Mori Ogai, and they acted in unison, perfectly coordinated. Testing him like this was enough. Yakimaru. Elise. Elise was the first to stop. Her syringe was sliced in two by Yakimaru, leaving her weaponless. Meanwhile, Dazai Osamu swiftly joined the fray, positioning himself between Yakimaru and Elise. He stood fearlessly, calm and rational to a terrifying degree. Yakimaru's right arm blade narrowly veered away from him, barely grazing past his face. Dazai blew a breath, sending a few strands of his hair fluttering. He felt a slight regret. If Yakimaru had gone just a little further, he could have been decapitated in an instant without any pain. Alright, stop. Dazai Osamu's actions proved that Yakimaru listened to him. Yakimaru did not attack, but his gaze remained fixed in Mori Ogai's direction, locked onto that sinful life flame. Mori Ogai's professional curiosity took over. Seeing that there was no immediate danger, he began to analyze. How does he see me? Is it the mask, crafted from special material? Or is it his unique abilities that directly alert him, urging him to act? To be honest, Mori Ogai didn't believe Yakimaru possessed such a strong sense of justice. A black-haired boy without arms or legs, wearing a mask every day, was someone without an identity, someone who either lived in the underground world or had someone protecting him as he grew up. How could such a person have been taught such a black and white view of good and evil? It's not that the perspective of good and evil is bad, but it's unnecessary for someone like him. To exist was already incredibly difficult, and he still had to learn how to fight. The fact that he didn't harbor envy toward normal people with complete limbs was already admirable. Neither Dazai Osamu understood the way Dr. Mori's mind worked. He picked up the discarded arm, brushed off the dust, and carefully reattached it to the weapon embedded in Yakimaru's hands. Yakimaru was filled with all kinds of confusion. He didn't need a sixth sense to tell him how dangerous the people around him were. Dororo, you must never get close to people like this. Dazai Osamu grabbed Yakimaru, trying to pull him forward, but no matter how hard he tugged, the stubborn boy remained rooted to the spot like a nailed-down post. Mori Ogai, watching with amusement, said, he doesn't want to enter the clinic, so there's no way I can give him a full-body checkup. Looks like your puppet isn't as obedient as you claimed. Elise, who was standing beside him, chimed in sarcastically, he looks kinda dumb. Upon hearing this, Dazai Osamu was displeased. Yakimaru is very obedient. It's all because of you, this heartless dark man, that he's been forced into combat mode. And as for you, a figure created by an ability, what right do you have to mock Yakimaru? He almost tore you apart. Having anticipated some conflict beforehand, Dazai Osamu took a deep breath, though he hadn't expected the conflict to be this intense. Earlier in the summer, the boy yet 14, once again restrained Yakimaru, dragging him into the clinic. His smooth execution of this task made Mori Ogai see him in a different light, thinking, Dazai-kun, you're still young, but your binding technique isn't bad at all. Meanwhile, Yakimaru's inner thoughts were. With his joints bound, he could only struggle desperately, feeling like a fish on a chopping board, completely devoid of any sense of safety. Dororo. Dororo, you can't keep treating me like this. I want to kill this evil man. In the clinic, with Dazai Osamu's tacit approval, Mori Ogai administered an injection of muscle relaxant directly into Yakimaru's neck, gently pressing the syringe to inject the liquid. Yakimaru's strength didn't weaken much, and he still had tremendous power. Mori Ogai remarked, his physical condition is exceptional, and his resistance to drugs isn't bad either. He's a promising candidate in terms of martial ability. After thoroughly enjoying Yakimaru's desperate struggling, Mori Ogai administered another injection, knocking Yakimaru out. Dazai Osamu's curiosity was instantly piqued. What kind of injection is this? Mori Ogai raised the now empty syringe in his hand, smiling kindly. A personally formulated solution. It won't harm the body, it'll just put him to sleep for a while. It's a unique formula, unavailable on the market. At that moment, Dazai Osamu felt a surge of motivation to learn about pharmacology. Now, I'll begin the examination, Mori Ogai said, asking, you don't mind, do you, Dazai-kun? Dazai Osamu's expression was calm, showing indifference. Mori Ogai raised an eyebrow, no longer paying attention to the family member of the patient. He was entirely focused on examining the living specimen under his care. At this moment, Elise, understanding the situation perfectly, quietly moved to the side, sitting on a cardboard box near the door, as light as if she had no weight. She even took out crayons and a sketchbook. On the operating table, Yakimaru lay unconscious, completely unaware of the advanced modern technology he was about to face. Mori Ogai first put on gloves, used a scalpel to delicately cut open the bandages on Yakimaru's body with such precision that he didn't even nick the skin. After that, he saw a deep red mark beneath the bandages and furrowed his brows slightly. Was his skin peeled off? He then carefully felt Yakimaru's shoulder and arm bones, pausing briefly when he extended the arm, before revealing the prosthetics at the elbow joint. A pair of prosthetic forearms was removed by him and placed on the tray beside him. The black-haired youth had lost both arms and was immediately stripped of his legs as well. His clothes were removed, with Mori Ogai leaving him only in his underwear. Lying on the stretcher, the boy appeared almost like a dissected body, this unsettling sight causing Dazai Osamu's eyes to flicker slightly, as though feeling uncomfortable for some reason, even though he had seen plenty of dead people before. Mori Ogai explained the reason: it's not about rationality. Humans are always easily moved by the suffering of others, like the saying goes, when the rabbit dies, the fox grieves. His condition, even worse than death, inevitably stirs a discomfort in your mind. Dazai Osamu lowered his head and said, "I see." Yet he smiled faintly. "Continue, Dr. Mori. I need to know just how many defects Yakimaru has, what caused them, and whether there's a way to treat him. You did promise me you'd give me a satisfying answer." Why was he smiling? Mori Ogai was slightly surprised. With his keen eye, he could tell that Dazai Osamu had a strange attachment to this puppet. Following that, Mori Ogai's gaze rested on Yakimaru's mask. This face was too exquisitely crafted and expressionless, with no sign of discomfort. It was clearly the work of a top-tier sculptor, meticulously crafted to perfection for the wearer. "Dazai-kun, may I take it off?" After all, the examination tools can't be used with the mask on. Though his words were framed as a question, Mori Ogai's hands moved without hesitation. He noticed that as he removed the mask, Dazai Osamu suddenly turned his back to him, as if he had no intention of looking at the face beneath. Mori Ogai paused for a moment, sensing something was off as he continued to observe. Beneath the mask, a grotesque face, stripped of its skin, was exposed to the air. The eye sockets and nose were dark, hollow holes, and the mouth revealed only sharp white teeth, showing that Yakimaru had lost all his normal human senses from the very beginning. Is this Japan's latest horror film? The visual impact was overwhelming, even for someone like Mori Ogai, who was accustomed to witnessing the state of human death. He was utterly stunned, never expecting the face beneath the mask to be so horrifying. His gaze scattered, his lips slightly parted, and even his eyes refused to look directly at Yakimaru's real appearance. "Dazai-kun, why didn't you mention this to me earlier?" At the door, Elise heard Rin Taro's sharp gasp and quickly turned her head. "Rin Taro?" Immediately, the clinic erupted with the terrified scream of a young girl seeing a ghost. "What is this awe?" Dazai Osamu turned towards Elise, walking over calmly. He reached out and gently patted the terrified Elise on the top of her head, using the very head-patting move he had learned from Yakimaru to immediately erase her presence. The blonde young girl looked at Dazai Osamu in shock, unable to resist before vanishing. Mori Ogai tensed up completely. "Dazai-kun?" After dispelling Mori Ogai's human-like ability projection, Dazai Osamu joyfully replied, "Dr. Mori, please focus a bit more. I just thought Miss Elise was too noisy, so I made her leave for a bit." He appeared to be making a joke, but in his heart, it was filled with nothing but a cold exchange of information and a calculated assessment of value. "This is my ability, no longer human." Having lost the qualifications of being human, unable to feel the emotions of ordinary people, he didn't want to look at Yakimaru, fearing that his own desire for death would be shaken. Existence is so dull. Why would someone, stripped of everything, living a fate worse than death, still want to survive? Mori Ogai's thoughts grew heavy, partly because of Yakimaru, but also because of Dazai Osamu. His cold, metallic gaze rested on Yakimaru's body. I've found 2 diamonds. Unfortunately, one of those diamonds has been shattered to this state, a condition beyond repair. He removed Yakimaru's unusually ear, touched the scalp, confirming it wasn't a wig. Suddenly, as if he had discovered something, he followed the scalp down to the neck, his hand feeling along the back for further examination. The spine is not right, Mori Ogai said loudly. Dazai-kun, his spine is also artificial. Dazai Osamu instinctively wanted to look but forced himself to resist, narrowly avoiding falling into Dr. Mori's trap. Mori Ogai had no intention of tricking him into turning around. At this moment, he was genuinely astonished by the unimaginable nature of life itself. If Yakimaru's internal organs were intact, this young man had lost his eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, spine, and limbs. It could be said that he had endured more tortures than any punishment recorded in human history. It's worth noting that even the notoriously cruel methods of the port mafia, when dealing with traitors, at most involve smashing a person's teeth on the stairs, cutting off an arm, and then rewarding them with a few bullets. The ones who tortured him, just how much did they hate him? Dazai Osamu did not respond, faintly sensing that the reality was likely far more horrifying than even his own grim suspicions. Mori Ogai adjusted his mindset back to that of a doctor and, after completing the initial procedures, lifted Yakimaru and placed him into the examination device. High-tech medical equipment is always far more precise than the human eye or experience. After several hours of examination passed, while Dazai Osamu dozed off in a chair, Mori Ogai set down the sealed report and said, "Dazai-kun, we might be facing a medical dilemma unprecedented in history." Dazai Osamu, who had spent 3 days exhausting all his efforts to sabotage the sheep, now found his face showing signs of weariness, as even staying up all night had begun to take its toll. What dilemma? He's like this from birth. Is there really someone in this world who has struggled with fate since the moment they were born? Mori Ogai felt bewildered. His hand slipped slightly, and the boy on the examination table lowered his head. His unhealthy-looking cheek muscles twitched, and his teeth gently clenched together. It wasn't shock, but rather an indescribable pressure that emanated from him. "Hey, Dr. Mori. You say he's been fighting so hard to survive. What's the point of it?" "There is no point." Mori Ogai gave an answer unlike what most people would, one that resonated with Dazai Osamu's mindset yet did not contradict common sense. The middle-aged man, dressed in a white lab coat, set down his notes and pen, feeling somewhat fatigued as he rubbed the edge of his hairline. In the stillness of the late night, he spoke to his youth companions. "This is humanity. No matter if they live in hell, there will always be those who refuse to accept their fate. Dazai-kun, do you still want to save him? To save someone completely unlike you, who resists death and utterly rejects the will to die that you desire?" Under Mori Ogai's simple question, Dazai Osamu's nerves tensed. He muttered, "I want him to die." Mori Ogai, smiling, guided him to voice his inner thoughts. "Yes, death can bring relief. The puppet you call Yakimaru no longer needs to struggle on the brink of death." Dazai Osamu, entranced by Mori Ogai's words, kept thinking about the benefits of death, and murderous intent began to rise. But before he could stand up, he suddenly let out a cry, covering his face, his fingers tightly blocking his eyes. "Dr. Mori, why haven't you put the mask back on him yet?" Mori Ogai innocently replied, "I just finished the examination, and his face also needs ventilation." The black chair swiveled slightly, full of mischievous intent. "Dazai-kun, face reality." "I refuse. I use 3D facial recognition technology to assess it for you, and the person who made his mask is undeniably a top master. His facial structure is quite good, his real face isn't that different from the mask." "What are you trying to say?" "What I'm saying is, just accept it for now. Yakimaru is still a rather handsome young man. That kind of just accept only works if you turn off the lights. Dazai Osamu glared angrily at Mori Ogai through the gaps between his fingers, and if looks could kill, Mori Ogai would have been slashed into pieces 1,000 times over. Mori Ogai, however, was quite tolerant toward this young man who shared a similar intellect and temperament to his own, which in turn caused him to develop a bit of fondness for Yakimaru as well. Those who fight to survive always possess a certain explosive force of life that can leave a deep impact on others. And then they captivate those lost souls like Dazai-kun. After waking from a deep sleep, having spent the night in unconsciousness, Yakimaru suddenly felt that his clothes had been changed. Sitting up alertly, the first thing he saw was the calm, white flame before him. The flame seemed a bit lifeless. Yakimaru reached out again to touch Dororo's head. Had something happened? Dazai Osamu, his eyes wide from a sleepless night, muttered in a daze, Yakimaru, from now on, we'll follow him and eat instant noodles. We can't afford the medical bills for now. Beside them, Mori Ogai was eating instant noodles without a care for his image. What's wrong with instant noodles? They're cheap. Yakimaru, having lost contact with the outside world and relying only on his instincts to make judgments, thought for a moment, then extended his arm, drawing his blade and pointing it in Mori Ogai's direction, expressing a question to Dororo. Kill that person. Dazai Osamu, with lifeless eyes, pushed the arm back in, seriously observing Yakimaru's delicate, beautiful mask. Does Yakimaru's face really match the mask? With this thought, Dazai Osamu unknowingly sank into the strange idea that Mori Ogai had planted in his mind. Yakimaru, even if you have to sell yourself in the future, make sure to earn that money back for me. Yakimaru felt as though this pure white flame had suddenly become tainted for a second. Maybe I was mistaken. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8, The Suicide Infiltration. The clinic now had 2 new freeloaders. Dr. Mori. That morning, just after Mori Ogai had finished his instant noodles, a frantic knocking came from the door, signaling that even during non-working hours, there would always be someone who believed doctors should provide 24-hour service. He hurriedly tidied up his desk and rushed to open the door. 10 minutes later, as he wiped the cold sweat from his brow, Mori Ogai said to the patient with external injuries, "Don't let the wound touch water. It'll be fine in a few days." Behind him, Dazai Osamu was casually reading a book, while Yakimaru sat in a chair, expressionless yet radiating a murderous aura. The burly man, upon hearing the instructions, immediately wanted to flee, but after hesitating for a moment, he still paid the consultation fee. Is this enough? Yes, that's enough. Mori Ogai watched the injured man leave, then counted the cash before turning to the expressionless Yakimaru, praising him. "Yaki-kun, I suppose that's the right way to address you. Your killing intent is impressive, keep it up." Dazai Osamu let out a mocking laugh. Every time Yakimaru tried to stand up, Dazai would grab his left hand, preventing him from moving. Feeling his hand restrained, Yakimaru would sit back down, and then Dazai would let go. And so the cycle repeated. The two seemed to be waiting to see who would lose patience first. In ancient Japan, it was quite common for names to have the suffix maru. Yakimaru was a childhood name given to him by his adoptive father, Jukai, while his formal name was the Yaki that Mori Ogai referred to. Such an antiquated name couldn't avoid sparking speculation between the two, as they both believed that the person who raised Yakimaru was a master at crafting prosthetics. The artificial limbs were crafted with such precision, perfectly fitting the human body, that it couldn't have been achieved in a short time. Mori Ogai tapped his chin with the cap of his fountain pen, saying, "I still don't quite understand. It's one thing for the prosthetic arms to function normally, but how is it that the prosthetic legs and spine can support Yaki-kun's advanced combat abilities? This defies science. There aren't any circuits or neural connections inside the prosthetics." He expected Dazai-kun to respond, but when he looked over, he found that Dazai was completely engrossed in his book, oblivious to everything else. Dazai-kun, what are you reading? A book. Dazai Osamu held up the banned book in his hand, showing the title to Mori, The Complete Suicide. Mori Ogai. Mori Ogai sighed, rubbing his forehead. Aren't you curious about Yaki-kun's body structure? This kind of medical matter is best left to professionals. I don't really know much about it, Dazai Osamu replied, casually shirking responsibility. He waved the book in front of Yakimaru, and Yakimaru, sensing it, grabbed his hand. After feeling the book, he realized what it was and no longer questioned it. Dazai Osamu told him, Dr. Mori, my ability is to nullify other abilities, so his ability to move freely definitely isn't due to any supernatural power. This was a truly extraordinary puppet. Mori Ogai pondered, if we had better equipment, maybe we could detect energy fluctuations in his body. Oh, good luck with that, Dazai Osamu replied, showing little interest. Dazai-kun, when do you have time to go to the port mafia? Based on Yaki-kun's hostility toward me, I'm concerned he might impulsively attack others. Mori Ogai raised a crucial issue regarding their cooperation. Yakimaru's situation isn't something you need to worry about. I'll figure out a way to handle it, Dazai Osamu said decisively, no longer intending to let Yakimaru act as freely as before. As for the timing, tomorrow morning will do. Mori Ogai's eyes held a hint of amusement. So soon? Dazai Osamu hinted, I'm afraid if I stay any longer, your clinic might have to close down by tomorrow. The Sheep King, Nakahara Chuya, was full of rage, waiting to unleash it. Even if his opponent were a fool, it wouldn't take more than a day for him to track down the unfortunate enemy responsible for his troubles. Mori Ogai said, are you referring to the Sheep King? That poor gravity manipulator, stabbed in the back by his own people. After the sheep split, they had to rely on the armed organization GSS, leaving behind a group of defenseless children for him to care for. I heard all of this happen shortly after Dazai-kun joined the sheep. Dazai Osamu flatly denied it, that was clearly the fault of that reckless little shorty's incompetent leadership. If he can't even manage his own organization, how could you blame someone like me, who is just temporarily staying with them? Except for the enraged Nakahara Chuya, no one would have guessed that the one who incited Shirase, drew GSS's attention to the sheep, and ultimately caused the organization to splinter was none other than a boy not even 14 years old. Muddy filth dealing with muddy filth. He didn't kill anyone, nor did he have the intent to harm. His only goal was to utterly disgust Nakahara Chuya. Even so, in Yakimaru's eyes, Dazai Osamu's soul remained untarnished by evil. He was clean, a person who didn't care about good or evil, only wanting to witness the brilliance of human nature. Dazai Osamu still retained the pure heart of a child. To this day, he had yet to truly take that step beyond the line dividing black and white. Mori Ogai, having seen enough, maintained a calm expression. Let's put your personal matters aside for now. The person who just left won't reveal anything about seeing you and Yaki-kun at the clinic. Dazai Osamu was slightly surprised. What did you do to him? Before officially entering the port mafia, he couldn't afford to expose his connection with Dr. Mori. Mori Ogai only smiled without answering. Dazai Osamu didn't press further, letting his mind run through various possibilities, but in the end, his thoughts dissipated as Yakimaru once again made a move to stand up. Dazai Osamu held him down, noticing that Yakimaru was becoming inexplicably restless. Mori Ogai bluntly revealed the truth. Dazai-kun, you can't mistreat him like this. He probably needs to use the restroom. Dazai Osamu froze. Dororo, I won't go far, but I need to take care of my bodily needs. Yakimaru, feeling quite helpless, thought. Just a few meters away was a villain among villains, and yet the Dororo, by his side wouldn't let him go and fight. Instead, he was stuck here, doing nothing. Although his endurance was remarkable, and he lacked the nerves for pain or touch. That didn't mean he didn't have the same basic needs as an ordinary person, such as eating and relieving himself. On the contrary, his physiological issues often left him feeling deeply perplexed. For instance, during his childhood, Jukai practically raised him through numerous incidents involving both waste and urine, which shattered his self-esteem early on. As a result, Yakimaru had learned to face the harshness of life with calm acceptance. When his hand was released, Yakimaru didn't immediately head out. Feeling uneasy, he wanted to bring her along with him. This place was too dangerous. After Mori Ogai pointed out where the restroom was, Dazai Osamu simply pushed Yakimaru towards it, with neither of them needing to find a secluded corner outside. Yakimaru refused to relieve himself under Dazai Osamu's watchful eyes, but Dazai merely pouted and said, "I've already seen all of you." Walking a few steps away, Dazai Osamu went to the mirror to adjust the bandages, making sure he would look perfect when heading out. Yakimaru quickly finished and returned, standing silently behind him like a ghost. Dazai Osamu stood on his tiptoes, not quite satisfied. He is a little shorter than Yakimaru, but it was all because the other's legs were too long. If they could be replaced, he would definitely make sure they were shorter. Yakimaru, Dazai Osamu smiled at him sincerely, thinking about the next plan. "We're about to walk into a den of villains. Any wrong move from you could get me killed in the Port Mafia. Isn't that thrilling? I'm super excited to see what you'll do next." His voice lowered, lacking the intimidation of an adult. "Don't disappoint me, Dororo." Yakimaru, following old habits from a past life, didn't like lingering near the restroom for too long. Calculating how much time they had spent together, he nudged Dororo. A completely energized Dazai Osamu? "I'm watching, you go take care of your business. Don't get constipated." Pushed toward a wall, Dazai Osamu stood there with a puzzled expression. He turned around to see Yakimaru purposely facing away from him. Dazai wished he hadn't understood Yakimaru's intentions. Alright, it seemed Yakimaru sometimes had a bit too much of a protective instinct toward him. Morning. Under a bright sky with warm sunlight and clear weather, Dazai Osamu joyfully dragged Yakimaru to jump into the sea. Two splashes echoed across the waters of Yokohama's port. In that moment, Yakimaru's survival instinct kicked in, and he started trying to save himself, his hands frantically moving through the water. Dazai Osamu tightly clung to the struggling Yakimaru, resting his head against his neck, his face showing a hazy fascination with death, along with the excitement of attempting suicide together with Yakimaru. "Don't think about escaping, just obediently die with me." Under Dazai Osamu's twisted amusement, another voice took root even deeper in his heart. "Give up. You haven't even taken a real look at this world, why would you like it? After you die, maybe you'll go to heaven. As for me, going to hell might not be so bad." Unlike Dazai, Yakimaru had not given up on the hope of survival. He kept trying to bring both of them back to the surface. In Yakimaru's understanding, he believed that he and Dororo had fallen into the water. Dororo, terrified to the extreme, was clinging to his body, preventing him from swimming properly. No. He couldn't continue like this. He was Yakimaru, the one destined to slay the 12 demon gods. How could he fail here? The life flame within Yakimaru surged, burning brightly. The remnants of the demon god's power intertwined with another strange force that had been within him since birth. In an indescribable surge of energy, it erupted from him, with Yakimaru at its center. No one can kill the one fated to vanquish the demon gods, Yakimaru. The deeply hidden lore of the world of Dororo was, for the first time, revealed through Yakimaru. Dazai Osamu watched in disbelief as a large school of fish swarmed toward them, circling around them. The sound of a steam whistle and waves of gasps from the crowd on the surface echoed through the air. It was as if all the forces of nature were coming to Yakimaru's rescue. The buoyancy beneath his feet made Dazai Osamu realize that his idea had failed. Yet, the plan hadn't failed. Dazai discreetly let out a few bubbles, feeling the surging life force from within Yakimaru's battered body. For a moment, he realized that Dr. Mori hadn't been wrong. This was the miracle of life bursting forth with extraordinary vitality. The two were fished out and rescued by some low-ranking members of the port mafia from a passing ship. Thus, Dazai Osamu and Yakimaru entered a place filled with a crimson glow. Surrounded by villains? In his dazed and shocked state, Yakimaru felt like he had fallen into a den of bandits. Before he could even unleash his killing intent, his body was restrained, his hands bound tightly with handcuffs, leaving him severely confined. Dazai Osamu didn't fare much better, though his frail and delicate appearance, along with his young age, gave the port mafia members the impression that he had been under Yakimaru's constant protection. Weakly, he said, "We were being chased by the Sheep King of Suribachi Street and had no choice but to jump into the sea, seeking help from the port mafia. Who says a legendary leap can only be made once? Doing it twice is just right." On the run from the pursuing the Sheep King Nakahara Chuya, who had a slew of curses ready to hurl his way, Dazai Osamu managed to sneak into the port mafia with Yakimaru in tow. He even successfully met the aging leader of the port mafia, skillfully remaining under the radar with a plan quietly hatched between him and Mori Ogai to stay at the port mafia headquarters. Yakimaru, with a heavy heart, watched as the flames of evil surrounded Dororo, feeling a deep, painful helplessness. "I'm too weak. I can't protect her." "Don't be so upset," came Dazai's reassuring voice. In the monitored room, Dazai Osamu, sensing Yakimaru's growing resistance and silence, tried to comfort him. However, anyone listening would certainly want to throttle him. "The one who should truly be upset is me. I survived under your protection but couldn't achieve my wish of leaving behind this puppet and dying alone." The port mafia executive, who was watching them, was startled upon hearing this and remarked, "Does this guy have suicidal tendencies?" Following that, Dazai Osamu's hidden tendencies were quickly reported. With the port mafia's capabilities, they soon uncovered Dazai Osamu's repeated suicide attempts within Yokohama. The leader of the port mafia, upon hearing these strange occurrences one after another, couldn't help but develop an interest in Dazai Osamu. "This brat, is he really seeking to submit to us?" The old man on the bed coughed, gripping the edge of the bed as he tried to sit up. He was rescued by the port mafia during one of his suicide attempts. His desire not to live is genuine, but perhaps he wanted to ensure someone else survives instead. "Ah, I'd actually like to meet that disabled young man," Mori Ogai advised. "He's unable to speak." The old man, his eyes clouded with age, looked at him and asked, "Mute?" As a doctor who had also examined both Dazai Osamu and Yakimaru, Mori Ogai replied with full confidence, "Yes, he has no eyes, no nose, no tongue, no ears, and even no hands or legs." The violent-natured old man's breath suddenly became irregular, shocked by this revelation. "I don't believe it." "Boss, you can send a subordinate to investigate." Mori Ogai sincerely suggested the idea, not intending to scare the port mafia leader into developing any bad habits from shock. That was far from being a beautiful puppet, it was more like a demon child. At the port mafia headquarters, the officer in charge of interrogations, Ozaki Koyo, was tasked with investigating the situation. After knocking, she entered the room and immediately saw Dazai Osamu snoring away, fast asleep, while Yakimaru sat motionless on the edge of the bed, so silent and still that it was as if no life remained in him. Yakimaru's arm slightly moved, but from under the covers, a hand quickly grabbed his, playfully saying, "Yakimaru, don't be so harsh on such a beautiful auntie." Ozaki Koyo smiled faintly. "Auntie?" She was only about 3 years older than the two of them. Dazai Osamu, successfully waking up from his nap, rubbed his eyes and sat up. "May I ask why someone from the port mafia has come to see us? Has your boss agreed to call off the pursuit?" Ozaki Koyo replied, "I'm here at the boss's request to examine someone's body." Dazai Osamu blinked. "And after the examination, will you take responsibility for him?" Ozaki Koyo chuckled lightly. "No." In just a few brief exchanges, Yakimaru found himself sold. He tried to pull his hand away, but in his haste, he accidentally detached his arm, exposing a gleaming blade that instantly put Ozaki Koyo on alert. Seizing the moment, Dazai Osamu casually pulled off Yakimaru's ear and showed it to Ozaki Koyo. Seeing the boy's body, one missing part after another, Ozaki Koyo's expression remained calm, though the shock she felt inside was undeniable. Yet, she still had to complete the final task as ordered by her boss. Remove his mask. I need to examine his face. That's an easy way to invite nightmares, you know. Dazai Osamu, leaning against Yakimaru from behind, tightly restrained him. With one hand, he removed the mask, but he didn't look directly at Yakimaru's face. Instead, he smiled at the beautiful female officer, watching her reaction. This is humanity, capable of pity, fear, and easily swayed by appearances, clouding their judgment. Yakimaru didn't need anyone's sympathy. So close. Yakimaru noticed that Dororo's life flame was about to overlap with his own. From an ordinary person's perspective, it probably looked like Dororo was actively embracing him. Does he not want me to fight? The black-haired boy's bone-chilling killing intent gradually faded. This was partly due to the diminished red aura around Ozaki Koyo, not as exaggerated as Mori Ogai's. Ozaki Koyo didn't manifest her ability, Golden Demon, and with a complex expression, she said, "He really trusts you." Dazai Osamu's expression remained calm, uninterested. "Of course he trusts me, I'm the one who raised him." Letting out a soft, displeased hum, Ozaki Koyo coldly remarked as she left the room, "Brat, don't betray that trust. You won't be able to repay it." What could drive someone blind, deaf, and mute to place such life and death trust in another? You live inside his soul. It's a bond so deep it would make anyone envious. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9, The Grey Mist. Over a month later, Dazai Osamu celebrated his 14th birthday while staying with the Port Mafia. The leader of the Port Mafia, bedridden and consumed by madness, used the organization to further train Yakimaru in handling both firearms and cold weapons. Taking advantage of this, Dazai Osamu sent Yakimaru out to deal with various criminals, minimizing the time they spent at headquarters. The old man had a twisted fascination with Yakimaru, though unfortunately, it was a morbid interest focused on torment and destruction. As the old man clung to life, his attitude shifted, from initially looking down on Yakimaru with admiration, to soon being overcome with envy at the unyielding and resilient life force within the boy. This transformation took place in just a short time. If devouring Yakimaru could grant him vitality, the old man would likely not hesitate to give the order. Such is human nature. The virtuous, when faced with Yakimaru, are provoked into feeling shame and sympathy, appreciating the health they possess that was not easily earned. The wicked, in contrast, see their own ugliness reflected back when exposed to Yakimaru's presence, forcing them to confront the truth of their inner selves. Returning once again to the bandit's den, Dazai Osamu was teaching Yakimaru how to write with his right hand. Birthday. Birthday. Understanding the meaning of the word, Yakimaru grasped what Dazai was trying to express. Is today Dororo's birthday? What day and month is it? I haven't prepared any kind of gift. June 19th. Dazai Osamu wrote the date again, not placing much hope in Yakimaru's ability to remember words. At most, it was just something to pass the time, planting in Yakimaru's mind something related to himself. The black-haired boy, whom Dazai Osamu had deemed uneducated, lowered his head, as if staring intently at the water stains on the table. His hair, partially covering his face, lent him an air of detached beauty. Then, Yakimaru's fingers moved, and using his damp fingertip, he deliberately wrote. Happy birthday. Whoa. Dazai Osamu cheered childishly, grabbing Yakimaru's hand and excitedly scribbling out more words. Yakimaru, do you know how to read? When is your birthday? Where are you from, and who taught you how to write? A flood of characters overwhelmed Yakimaru, as if in the darkness he could see floating symbols flying toward him. These symbols stitched together a long-forgotten language, stirring memories of his past life. Yakimaru's native language was Chinese, and he hadn't spent much time learning Japanese. His foundation had been laid mostly through manga, anime, and TV shows, so after 14 years, remembering even a few characters was no small feat. He tried his best to decipher the content Dororo had written for him, half guessing and half imagining his way to understanding some of it. Roughly speaking, it seemed like Dazai-Osamu was asking about his past. How should he respond? Yakimaru's mind went blank for a second, similar to the feeling of being asked to write an English essay as a child. It was as if there were some words in his head, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't string them together into a coherent sentence. In this life, being nearly illiterate, Yakimaru remained silent and decided to rely on a tried-and-true solution, pictures. He drew the simplest smiling face for Dazai-Osamu. 3 curved lines came together to form an internationally recognized expression, a smile, humanity's way of showing goodwill to the outside world. Dazai-Osamu stared at the crooked, clumsy drawing of a smiling face, then looked at Yakimaru's expressionless, unsculpted face. His shoulders slumped. Idiot, who taught you that? You don't even know what a smile is. After asking so many questions and only getting a smile in return, was it exhausting or simply pointless? While Dazai-Osamu was lost in thought, pondering what expression to show, his face was touched by cold fingers. Unlike before, Yakimaru, who had once lacked awareness of gentleness, now made contact with surprising gentleness. Dazai-Osamu, who disliked physical contact, squinted slightly but didn't reject it as much this time. After all, it was just an artificial limb. Soon after, the patchwork black-haired boy stopped probing the bandages on Dazai's face and instead embraced him directly. Dazai's slender body trembled slightly, encircled by the prosthetics. Yakimaru gave him a birthday blessing, and what came through was the warmth of human connection and the heartbeat of another, something no person could refuse. What's so joyful about something like a birthday? Dazai-Osamu murmured under Yakimaru's embrace. What about you? When you were born, what did you feel? Did anyone embrace you, and not treating you like a monster? Thinking that way, perhaps our world isn't entirely beyond saving. Guarding himself with schemes and intelligence to prevent others from causing harm, while hiding his truest self, Dazai-Osamu closed his eyes. Letting his hair fall to obscure them, he allowed himself a moment of peace, detached from the world. Hello, Yakimaru. In the darkness, Yakimaru saw himself holding a white flame, burning strong. A flame smaller than his own, barely taking the shape of a small figure, this flame was unclear, its form indistinct. It lacked the previous appearance of loneliness and helplessness. Now, cradled in his arms, it quietly radiated the brilliance of life. What is Dororo? The name Dororo originates from the classic of mountains and seas. 350 miles further west lies Lai Mountain, where the trees are abundant with acorns, and the bird called Dororo can be found. It is said to be a real person. In ancient times, Dororo referred to a demon or monster, anything that was unclear or unidentifiable, something not quite human but not fully a creature, could be called Dororo. Yakimaru realized that he himself was Dororo, yet he was searching for another Dororo. He thought to himself. That's exactly why I can take on this mission. The melody of never giving up the fight, the clash between souls, hope born from despair, aren't these the reasons people who love the real world are drawn to the world of fantasy, signing a life-or-death pact to join the Transmigration department? I yearn for these things too. I want to become someone who can protect others, someone who won't give up on the world. This world is for Dororo. But the name is Yakimaru, a child of destiny. A few days passed in a blur, and Yokohama entered a period of fear and danger that gripped the hearts of its people. On a stormy, dark night, Yakimaru was once again drugged by Dazai-Osamu. The leader had summoned them both, but Dazai-Osamu didn't plan on bringing Yakimaru along. Besides, Yakimaru despised that old man, and Dazai couldn't force him to confront such vile criminals every day. Stay alert and don't let anyone but me get close to you. Dazai Osamu tucked a blanket over Yakimaru, the dosage of the drug just right, not enough to make him sleep too deeply. Before leaving, Dazai Osamu softly promised, I will cure you. Yakimaru shouldn't be trapped in a cage. An organization like the Port Mafia, which thrives on chaos and killing, would never treat Yakimaru kindly. By the time dawn breaks, a new order will emerge, and Dazai will find a way to get Yakimaru out of this place. He hoped that the intel Dr. Mori had provided was true, that somewhere in Yokohama, there was indeed a healer ability user. The sound of leather shoes echoed on the hallway floor as Dazai Osamu made his way toward his destination. Tonight, he will witness the death of the leader. As the private doctor of the leader cut through the old man's throat, blood splattered onto the wall and paper. 14-year-old Dazai Osamu stood by the window like a shadow, his boyish face not yet fully matured, watching with his own eyes as Mori Ogai committed the murder. After laughing heartily, Mori Ogai, with a face smeared in fresh blood, turned toward him. Not worried? Even if I die, Yakimaru won't. Dazai Osamu's words carried a double meaning, suspecting that Dr. Mori was testing his loyalty. You misunderstand, Mori Ogai smiled as he put away the bloody scalpel, speaking with casual indifference. Haven't you realized yet? Well, the moment you chose to ask for my help, you should have mentally prepared yourself. Dazai Osamu's heart sank, faintly predicting what Mori was implying, though his rational mind refused to dwell on it. He didn't care how far his life's road would stretch, as long as it remained interesting. Seeing the boy fall silent, Mori Ogai turned and headed toward the outer room, his expression now taking on a somber look. Dazai-kun, come with me to inform the others. Dazai Osamu, no longer just a passive observer, followed a step behind Mori Ogai. His gaze briefly swept over the lifeless body of the old man on the bed. Unknowingly, he matched Mori's pace, different in form but eerily alike in spirit. That day, the Port Mafia convened a meeting of its higher-ups. The main topic of discussion was the leader's death and the significant event of entrusting the Port Mafia to Mori Ogai before his passing. And Dazai Osamu was the key witness to it all. Throughout the entire day, Dazai Osamu endured suspicion and questioning from various angles. He never changed his story. Yes, that's exactly what the leader said. While gravely ill, he chose Dr. Mori as the next leader. Even the most skilled experts in psychology could not discern whether Dazai Osamu was telling the truth or lying. His heartbeat, facial expressions, and subtle movements all remained unchanged, tightly controlled within himself. Mori Ogai had never admired a young boy as much as he did now. Dazai-kun, you're a natural minds manipulator. Sooner or later, you'll fall into the depths of darkness. Mori Ogai walked over, stepping past the gazes of others, and placed a hand on Dazai Osamu's shoulder. Everyone, there's no need to press a 14-year-old child. The leader's interest in him and Yaki-kun wasn't recent. This was purely a coincidence, as the leader's health had already been failing for a long time. After expressions of sorrow and lament passed, Mori Ogai, with an air of compassion, sent Dazai Osamu off to rest. Yaki-kun is waiting for you. Go and get some rest. Dazai Osamu obediently responded, and without hesitation, he went back to find his companion. The higher-ups of the Port Mafia could clearly see that Dazai Osamu and Dr. Mori weren't close. No normal person would conspire with another to falsify the leader's last words, risking their own life in the process. This absurd situation is likely the truth. Thinking back to the leader's erratic behavior during his illness, the faces of the Port Mafia executives darkened. A few who had already sided with Mori Ogai suppressed their relief, exchanging glances with each other, knowing that a shift in the Port Mafia's leadership was inevitable. The executive Ozaki Koyo sat at the conference table, her wide sleeves concealing a hand that covered her mouth. She was smiling, just barely enough to notice. The leader, finally dead. When Dazai Osamu returned and reached to open the door, he couldn't help but pause. His hand recoiled from the door handle, and Dr. Mori's words, like a curse, echoed in his ears. You should have been mentally prepared when you chose to ask for my help. Proximity to vermilion makes you red, proximity to ink makes you black. Anyone with a bit of understanding of Japanese culture knows this principle, and Dazai Osamu was no exception. Before meeting Dr. Mori, the most reckless thing he had ever done was picking locks and breaking into private homes. Even when targeting the sheep organization, it was always minor schemes to sow discord, never harming anyone. He had never killed anyone. The leader was killed by Dr. Mori, and Dazai's role was merely to provide a false alibi for him. This was a good thing. Yokohama would finally find some peace, and the leader's death would save countless innocent lives. Dazai Osamu used this method to self-hypnotize, employing real hypnotic techniques to suppress the overwhelming dark thoughts from today. He didn't want to ruin Yakimaru's trust over the death of an old man. To this day, he still didn't fully understand how Yakimaru distinguished between good and evil, but guessed that Yakimaru would instinctively distance himself from those with malicious intent and actively strike against those who committed many wrongs. And every time, Yakimaru never targeted the wrong person. Meanwhile, far away, Nakahara Chuya once again found himself unfairly caught in the crossfire. At the moment Dazai Osamu made up his mind, the door handle turned, and the door was opened from the inside. Yakimaru stood tall and thin, facing him, his expressionless mask seemingly marked with a question. What are you doing standing outside? Dazai Osamu, startled, reflexively put on a bright and cheerful smile, full of goodness and charm. Look closely. I'm a person who has saved the city. The next minute of facing off was a moment Dazai Osamu didn't want to remember. He had never been as worried about becoming a bad person as he was right then. The white flame, like it was stirred by a strong wind from outside, flickered with great unease, wavering unpredictably. Yakimaru thought it was the wind rising. After waiting for a moment, he realized it wasn't the wind causing the disturbance, it was the unease coming from Dazai. The pure, white flame seemed to be veiled by a thin layer of gray silk, unable to disperse the darkness that threatened to cover it. Don't be afraid. Being surrounded by villains, Yakimaru, despite the hostility he endured, always prioritized Dororo. He wouldn't act rashly and put Dororo in danger of being captured and killed. He entrusted the task of navigating the world of light and making plans to Dazai, fully trusting him, while he remained in place. Sleeping for a while wouldn't hurt. Yakimaru opened his hollow, emotionless eyes and raised his hand in Dazai Osamu's direction. Dazai's eyelashes trembled slightly. His hand moved lightly from the top of Dazai Osamu's messy head, all the way down to his arm, eventually gripping Dazai's slender wrist, which was wrapped in bandages. The cold touch of his fingers conveyed a silent, unwavering determination. Such a strong willpower overwhelmed Dazai Osamu's fragile will to live. It was like the vast difference between a glacier and a mere piece of broken ice. The glacier is submerged deep in the ocean, while the floating ice drifts on the surface, free but without a place to settle, gradually drifting toward the massive glacier. No one knows how long the floating ice will take to melt, nor whether the glacier will be destroyed by the rising temperatures of the world. In any case, at this moment, neither of the two surviving individuals are concerned with the distant future. Yakimaru pulled Dazai Osamu into the room and wrapped him tightly in a blanket, even though it was a summer night without air conditioning, leaving Dazai sweating profusely as if in a sauna. Stop it, it's too hot. Yakimaru, I'm not even cold at all. As Dazai Osamu continuously cried out for help, the thin, mist-like gray haze dissipated. Yakimaru was stubborn. Dororo, you were shivering from the cold just now. Sometimes slow-witted, sometimes keen, Yakimaru's sixth sense told him one thing: girls need to be carefully protected. When they're in a bad mood, you have to find a way to give them warmth. Treating Dororo like a future girlfriend, Yakimaru felt content as he guarded this flame. The life flame returned to its original state and began to burn joyfully again. That's better. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10, Demon God's Power. When Nakahara Chuya saw Yakimaru again was at a sushi shop, and conveniently saw Dazai Osamu as well. The sullen boy in the hoodie instantly went berserk. Dazai Osamu. The cracked pavement beneath him lifted up in chunks, as if the gravitational center around him was undergoing a violent transformation. Yakimaru's attention was drawn to the large, burning dark red flame, his muscles tensing. He felt the illusion that he was about to be consumed by the evil power released by the demon god, burning alongside it almost entirely. His fighting instincts had just kicked in when his back was suddenly hugged by the gum-like Dazai Osamu. Dazai Osamu wrapped his strong arms around Yakimaru's neck, hanging off his back, and peered out to look at the fuming Nakahara Chuya. He still had a piece of crab meat sushi in his mouth, chewing it slowly. "Oh, Sheep King." With cheeks puffed like a hamster, Dazai Osamu grinned maliciously after a 3-second pause. "Raising a bunch of little lambs, working hard every day to earn money, how's that life treating you? If you ask me, there's no need to target Shirase-kun. After all, who in Suribachi Street hasn't been through some shady business? Robbed someone, accidentally killed someone, now everyone in Suribachi knows you've run off to work outside. Listen to yourself, is that what humans say?" In response, Yakimaru remained firmly in front of Dazai Osamu, unwavering, shielding him from the overwhelming murderous intent. In front of him was the dark red center of the demon god, and behind him was the innocent Dororo. Does one need to question who the real villain is? The biggest mistake of my life was taking you in, you trouble-stirring bastard. Over the past month, Nakahara Chuya had never endured such hardship. A powerful ability user, feared even by the port mafia as the Sheep King, yet here he was, reluctantly working regular jobs, making ends meet to support his family. The young man's resentment towards Dazai Osamu had reached its peak, and in his fury, he took it out on Yakimaru. "So, you two really do know each other." Yakimaru's left leg, reattached to his body, was undeniable proof. Yakimaru quietly shifted his body, unable to free himself from Dororo without harming her. If there was no other option, he would have to carry Dororo and run away. Noticing Yakimaru's intention, the corner of Dazai Osamu's mouth curled up as he continued mocking Nakahara Chuya. "Yakimaru and I have known each other for a long time. I even saw him save a child who was about to be killed by the port mafia. But who would have thought that a certain someone would go to protect the villain and target the person who act with justice? Truly fitting for the Sheep King, who says, anyone who invades the sheep's territory will face a fierce retaliation, no matter who they are." Nakahara Chuya's face alternated between green and black, as he realized those were his own words. Suddenly, Nakahara Chuya caught the key point. His name is Yakimaru? Dazai Osamu noticed a certain hint of concern in Nakahara Chuya's voice, so he immediately changed his words. "You heard wrong. His name is Dazaimaru, an ancient semi-automaton puppet passed down by my ancestors." Nakahara Chuya, disgusted, shouted, "I clearly didn't hear wrong. He's a human. How could he be a puppet?" Dazai Osamu let out a faint laugh. "Have you ever seen a human who can destroy and reattach their limbs?" Nakahara Chuya hesitated, he had never seen such a thing before. Yakimaru noticed that the demon god had been slow to attack, causing him to grow tense. If the demon god specialized in deceiving humans and used some unknown method to erode Dororo's mind, it would be disastrous. He began to step backward, intending to escape the demon god with the person on his back. Seeing this, Dazai Osamu indifferently stuck out his tongue. "I was just fooling you." Across from them, Nakahara Chuya, whose fury had been suppressed, suddenly exploded in rage and attacked. This startled the sushi shop owner and customers behind Yakimaru and Dazai Osamu, who let out terrified screams. The crimson fist was caught by someone. For the first time, Nakahara Chuya's superpowered gravity punch was blocked by Yakimaru's unsheathed right hand. Not only was Yakimaru slightly surprised, but Nakahara Chiya's eyes also widened, his deep blue pupils flashing with both caution and astonishment. Their reactions were all taken in by Dazai Osamu, who, through his contact with Yakimaru's skin, activated, no longer human, nullifying Nakahara Chiya's prized trump card, gravity. In the next moment, Nakahara Chiya was fiercely kicked by Yakimaru, sending him crashing into the wall across the street. Cars on the street screeched to a halt, some speeding away in panic, not daring to intervene in the impending conflict that was becoming a common sight in Yokohama. Dazai Osamu, lazily resting on Yakimaru's shoulder, said, "There's no need to run when dealing with him." He released his hold on Yakimaru's restraint, grabbed his left hand, and calmly walked away, thinking to himself, "With me here, even the world's strongest ability users are nothing more than defeated opponents under my command." Ability, no longer human. An incredibly rare ability, a power that absolutely nullifies other ability, virtually unheard of in the world. Nakahara Chiya, not too badly injured, got up, brushing the dust off his face. However, he completely ignored his rising hatred towards Dazai Osamu, instead glaring at Yakimaru. "Do you know Arahabaki?" "How can Yakimaru know? He can't even hear." Dazai Osamu burst into laughter. In response to Nakahara Chiya, the black-haired boy expressionlessly grabbed his right hand. His sword unsheathed, he left the prosthetic with Dazai Osamu while his right arm transformed into a weapon, preparing to slash down in Nakahara Chiya's direction. Nakahara Chiya's patience ran dry, and he retaliated in a frenzy. "Is it really that hard to give me an answer?" His entire body was once again enveloped in the red glow of his ability. The highly concentrated gravitational force gathered around him, shining intensely. In a moment of disbelief, the long-blind Yakimaru briefly saw Nakahara Chiya clearly. He resembled a young boy in appearance, an extremely deceptive sight. Absolutely someone to be killed. Yakimaru remained indifferent, his murderous intent unwavering. Arahabaki? Tsuchimikado. Compared to that, Dazai Osamu's mind swirled with various thoughts. In Japanese mythology, there is a legendary god of war known as Tsuchimikado. This type of name, associated with indigenous deities, what connection could it have with Nakahara Chiya and Yakimaru? Nakahara Chiya always seemed to be searching for information about Arahabaki in Suribachi Street. Hesitating for less than a millisecond, Dazai Osamu let go of Yakimaru's hand, calmly releasing him into the fight, as Yakimaru's thirst for battle grew. "Show me the answer through combat, Yakimaru." The battle between Yakimaru and Nakahara Chiya was an unexpected twist of fate, yet also a confrontation destined after their respective journeys through time. The only one who could remain a bystander to their deadly clash was Dazai Osamu, the third figure in this chain of intertwined fates. From the initial attempts to evade and being unable to escape the gravitational pressure, to Yakimaru adapting to the power of the demon god and launching a relatively powerful counterattack, this was only his third time facing Nakahara Chiya. Despite Nakahara Chiya's outward appearance of being a highly emotional person, he never abandoned his rationality. The more they fought, the more his scalp tingled, realizing that Yakimaru was adapting to his released ability at an unimaginable speed. How is this possible? Can a human really do this? Nakahara Chiya's heart pounded, a growing sense of unease warning him. Yakimaru was exceptionally capable of adapting to the power of Arahabaki, and what's more, he seemed to be gradually developing a stronger resistance against his attacks. The hand Nakahara Chiya had kept in his pocket finally emerged, no longer holding back as he blocked Yakimaru's strike. Dazai Osamu, surprised, remarked, "Ah, look at that, the little shrimp's finally taken his hand out of his pocket." A vein bulged on Nakahara Chiya's forehead. While fiercely pushing Yakimaru back, he roared, "I'm not short. I'm still in my growth period." The mental strain caused by his height added to his frustration. Standing at just over 1.5 meters tall, Nakahara Chiya erupted in fury. Even under continuous provocation, if he could still remain calm and composed, then he wouldn't be the same person who dared to single-handedly fight his way through the port mafia in Suribachi Street, and later go to the GSS armed organization to beat up Shirase, the sheep king of Suribachi Street. Yakimaru's pressure quickly mounted. The prosthetic limbs his foster father had made for him were not made of steel, designed to enhance his agility and speed, but in doing so, they reduced his ability to withstand pressure. The gravity was ever present, both from the front and behind. This is the power of the demon god, beyond mortal limits. How can I possibly fight him? Yakimaru spun through the air, dodging fists and kicks as he slashed his sword toward Nakahara Chuya. Like a wild beast, his instincts were flawlessly displayed in his movements. After entering a perfect combat state, he could anticipate Nakahara Chuya's next intended strike. The 12 demon gods took away my body parts, but in return, they left behind power within my body. This power protects me from dying easily. I must use the remnants of their power to defeat them. I want my eyes, my voice, my face, my arms and legs. I will take them back. The lingering power of the demon god within Yakimaru's soul surged through his fragile prosthetics, concentrating all its force into this one strike. As this sword descended, Nakahara Chuya briefly saw an illusion. Yakimaru's entire body was engulfed in a strange, red flame, resisting the pull of gravity. His once pure, white body was partially consumed by the fire, with his life force boiling over, making him appear eerily similar to Nakahara himself when he falls into his corrupted state. Nakahara Chuya swiftly reinforced his defense, but he was a step too late. His left hand came into contact with the sword, and like a warrior's blade cleaving through the air, it left a long, narrow wound. Stripped of gravity, an unfamiliar pain coursed through Nakahara Chuya's body, the first time in a long while, since his rebirth as the God of Calamity. Tch, it's been a while since I've been hurt. Nakahara Chuya clutched his left hand, which was bleeding profusely. The wound was so deep that the bone was visible, though fortunately, it hadn't damaged his tendons or bones. He was fighting to the point where he began to doubt his own existence. Are you really my kind, or are you the type that specializes in killing your own? Yakimaru's state seemed somewhat different. His intense desire to slay the demon god made him ignore everything around him. His mind was consumed by the thought of killing, fully focused on Nakahara Chuya, determined to kill him. Why do you see me as your enemy? Let me tell you the truth, I've never killed an innocent person. Everyone who died by my hand was someone who deserved it. Nakahara Chuya bent slightly at the waist, his blood-covered arm causing him to furrow his brows in frustration, not wanting to unleash his full power. Once he fell into a corrupted state, he wasn't sure if he could regain his clarity. Yakimaru. Dazai Osamu noticed something was wrong. Nakahara Chuya, frustrated, explained again, angrily saying, "Do you really have to kill me?" Yakimaru stepped just outside Nakahara Chuya's reach, his expression emotionless as his sword rose and fell, intent only on killing. But no blood was spilled. The corrupted power didn't erupt either. Surprised, Nakahara Chuya looked up, realizing that Yakimaru had suddenly shifted his direction, blocking a bullet aimed at Dazai Osamu. Dazai remained unmoved, standing still without a change in his expression, regretfully saying, "That was close. If Yakimaru had only listened to the little shrimp, I might have finally succeeded in dying." He intentionally waited for the moment when Yakimaru was about to kill Nakahara Chuya, casting a glance in the direction of the sniper, forcing the sniper to fire first. This was meant to interrupt Nakahara Chuya before he could use his trump card. It worked, but also failed. Dazai Osamu was saved by Yakimaru, who, despite being consumed by bloodlust, chose to protect him first. Ignoring the burning pain in his hand, Dazai Osamu grabbed Yakimaru's sword and examined the blade. His gaze darkened. Shattered. The sword, meant for killing, had broken apart while saving a life. Yakimaru had no regrets. His broken sword remained connected to his right hand, and his left hand did not let go of Dazai-Osamu's fingers, preventing him from picking up the shattered blade. Silently, he conveyed, "It doesn't matter, as long as Dororo is safe." Dazai-Osamu suddenly turned to Nakahara Chuya, who cared little for money, and said, "This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, how would Yakimaru have lost his weapon?" Nakahara Chuya felt a tightness in his chest, his fury making it hard to breathe. This bastard was blaming him, and with such self-righteousness. "I wish that bullet had hit you instead. The last time he fought me with his sword, I took it to get it repaired. The design's the same, so once it's fixed, it should work again," Nakahara Chuya begrudgingly said, as if trying to offer a truce to Dazai-Osamu. "But the repair cost was way too high, and I haven't been able to cover the bill yet." Dazai-Osamu casually responded with an "oh," realizing Nakahara was broke. Exhausted, Nakahara Chuya said, "Does he have hearing problems or something? I've never heard him answer me, not even once." Dazai-Osamu sneered, "Seems like it's your eyes that have the problem." Nakahara Chuya was about to get angry when Dazai-Osamu suddenly plucked off Yakimaru's ears. "See? No ears." Nakahara Chuya gasped. Dazai-Osamu then used 2 fingers to poke at Yakimaru's mask, tapping near the eyes. The texture felt good to him. "Look closer, this is a mask." Nakahara Chuya stared hard, and finally realized the reason behind the constant unease he had felt. The black-haired boy's whole face was fake. In this world, Yakimaru's life itself is renewed by artificial means, redefined people's understanding of those with disabilities. Nakahara Chuya was devastated, forced to confront the harsh reality. Is this the kind of person I've been fighting against? Dazai-Osamu hinted, "He can't respond to you. But if you ask me, I might know a bit." Nakahara Chuya, whose arm had stopped bleeding under the pressure of his gravitational ability, gave Dazai a deep look, then sighed, leaving behind the shopkeeper's address to settle the repair bill. His heavy footsteps echoed as he walked away, no longer wanting to be involved in the internal strife between the two who were entangled with the port mafia. He'd deal with those two again another time. "Oh, do you really think I'd believe you, you trouble-stirring trash? Titch, animal instincts." Dazai-Osamu took a jab at Nakahara Chuya's character, then turned to look at Yakimaru, only to find that he too had been insulted. Annoyed, Dazai-Osamu roughly pulled on Yakimaru's ponytail, blood mixing with the strands of hair. Yakimaru lowered his head, "I'm sorry." Dazai-Osamu stuck Yakimaru's ears back on, picked up his arm, and made sure everything was put back in place, ensuring no one would notice the broken sword inside. Now, he just needed to go to the address the little shrimp provided and get another sword. After eating and exercising, the next step was to go find Mori-san and ask for some money. That was what Dazai-Osamu originally planned, but Yakimaru's actions interrupted his thoughts. Sensing that Dazai was about to leave, Yakimaru suddenly hugged him and then, like a bolt of lightning, dashed toward the port mafia. The momentum was no less than that of an enemy's vanguard launching an assault on the port mafia. "Why a Princess Carrie? I know you want to save me, but it's only my hand that's injured, not my legs." Dazai-Osamu flailed his arms, fiercely protesting. "The saddest thing in the world isn't that I'm standing right in front of you, and you can't see me, but that I, a normal person, am treated by you as if I'm disabled. Who's the real disabled one here?" Passers-by outside, in heartfelt voices, confirmed. How pitiful, those 2 boys are completely wrapped in bandages. Disabled times 2. At the port mafia headquarters, Mori-san, acting as the doctor for both of them, kindly examined them. After finishing the checkup, he sent Yakimaru, who clearly disliked being there, off to the side and personally tended to Dazai-Osamu's wounds, carefully bandaging them up. "Hurt anywhere else?" "No." Dazai-Osamu, with a dark expression, complained, "I only needed bandages, there was no need for you to come." Mori-san smiled and replied, "I'm a doctor, and also the future boss. Naturally, I need to show some concern for the witness who got shot." Otherwise, everyone might think I want to kill you. Dazai-Osamu responded, go ahead and kill me, that would be great. Mori-san smoothly changed the subject, Dazai-kun, do you have any opinions about the Sheep King? No opinion. Dazai-Osamu couldn't be bothered to continue analyzing with him and, in an instant, snatched Mori-san's wallet. Although Mori-san felt the weight of his wallet disappear and his eyelid twitched, he didn't pursue the matter. Those in need weigh things far more carefully than those who don't. Mori-san smiled as he left, leaving the room to one cunning person and one little rascal with impressive physical abilities. Dazai-Osamu opened the wallet, using his bandaged hand to rummage through for cash and credit cards. I wonder if there's enough money. Not knowing much about the cold weapons manufacturing industry, Dazai-Osamu pondered the potential of using both threats and persuasion. Meanwhile, after Mori-san had left, Yakimaru sat down across from Dazai-Osamu, feeling tired and frustrated as he realized that he simply couldn't kill a demon god. Though their thoughts weren't on the same wavelength, a strange sense of harmony arose between them. This was probably what people referred to as the legendary understanding. Yakimaru. Dazai-Osamu waved his hand a few times in front of Yakimaru's face, finally snapping the dazed person back to reality. Yakimaru slightly moved his head, a gesture indicating his confusion. Dazai-Osamu jumped down from his seat, dragging the medical kit that Mori-san had brought over and placing it beside Yakimaru. Dr. Mori, well, Mori-san, brought quite a few medical supplies for us. He's probably worried I might drag you along to the underworld at any moment. Titch, if that's really his plan, no amount of medicine would help. He took out a large amount of medical bandages from the kit, his eyes filled with fondness for them. The gray strips of cloth wrapped around you are about to fall apart, time to change them. Huh? Yakimaru, thinking there would be no problem, removed his outer clothing, only to realize that Dororo was about to start unwrapping the bandages on his body. He immediately stopped this alarming action. Dororo is a girl, and he's a boy. Are you embarrassed? Dazai-Osamu grinned slyly, getting back at him for carrying him in the princess hold earlier. A few pieces fell away, and without his arms and legs, Yakimaru lay on the bed. His body, now exposed, looked like a torn-apart puzzle. Combined with his beautiful face, it gave off a cold, twisted, and distorted sense of beauty. Dazai-Osamu carefully wrapped the clean bandages layer by layer around him. The white cloth that had covered Yakimaru before, or rather, the now gray strips of fabric, were successfully tossed into the trash. Satisfied with his work, Dazai-Osamu watched as Yakimaru curled up and turned his back to him. He let out a triumphant sigh. Relax, I didn't take any souvenir photos, nor did I pull your pants off. Dazai-Osamu, thinking about Yakimaru's strange, skinless body, clicked his tongue. Still, wrapping you up in bandages looks much better. Look at that. A monster like you, wrapped in bandages, with some makeup applied, wouldn't you blend right in with everyone else? Lying on the bed, the black-haired boy's hair became disheveled as he struggled. His body, curled up with his clothes hanging loose, was wrapped in layers of pristine, delicate bandages that replaced his skin. As long as it could be covered, his body always had a tough, resilient feeling unlike Dazai-Osamu's. Compared to a modern accident victim being discharged from the hospital, he resembled more an ancient wandering swordsman, poor but not weak. Dororo, aren't you afraid of seeing me like this? Yakimaru had no idea how his current appearance might attract those with bizarre or twisted aesthetics. He tried his best to remain calm. Once again, he strengthened his resolve to kill the demon god and reclaim his lost body parts. In the future, he was certain he would be able to see what Dororo looked like and hear her voice recounting the past. Chapter 10 End.